Well, it is 8 o'clock, which means that it is time for another Vinimark webinar. And today's topic is one that I've been looking forward to for a really long time, because we're going to dive into what I hope will become a supremely useful conversation for producers around the present challenges and opportunities that will define the future of white wine in South Africa. Because contrary to popular belief, South Africa actually has much of its heavy lifting done by the white wine segment of the industry. And roughly 70% of all wines produced in South Africa fall into that category. But I believe that there are still further opportunities to be seized and development and differentiation within the products in that industry. And hopefully this conversation will draw that out. So Vinimark have gathered a really exciting panel of both local and international spokespeople who will share recommendations and insights on where the industry is headed. We're going to spend a little bit of time deconstructing our national vineyard. And also, I think we can learn some lessons from some of our better marketed red wine cultivars. And then we'll explore the current status of our most prominent white cultivars, which will include Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, and Chardonnay. And we want to learn also how the wider world sees these South African cultivars. So we want to know where the obstacles are to growth, but hopefully we want to see where there are opportunities as well. So to help us on our way, we've got this great mix of personalities and voices that will come at the topic from a number of different angles. So we have the London-based master of wine, Anne Krabbeil, who's also an Investec Trophy Wine Show judge. We have Vinimark'S export director, Evan Alexander. We have the Bosman Family Vineyard Cellar Master, Cordelia Fourie, and joining us shortly, we have Spears Cellar Master, Johan Jordan. Now, I wanted to start today's conversation off from a bird's eye view, get an external look into what we're doing in South Africa. One of the stats that has always fascinated me when I think about South African wine is that we have only 1.9% of the world's vineyards, and yet we produce almost 4% of the world's wine. Now, it's also worth noting that South Africa's national vineyard has dropped by 10% in the last decade or so. But the actual production of wine from that vineyard has remained fairly static. Now, there's a number of different ideas and threads in those stats, and I wanted to ask Master of Wine Anne Krabbeil to give her assessment of these statistics and give her a impression about what this might mean for the macro direction of the South African wine industry. Good morning, Anne. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me. And thank you, Jono, for the question. I've prepared something here, and there are some European countries that produce excellent statistics, but also excellent overviews. And I am actually looking at a bullet list made by the Austrian Wine Marketing Board based on various data. And they have, as you say, a kind of view of the global wine market, and they say that they think the wine market, after having gone through immense changes in the 1980s, which was the big changeover from the classic regions until all the new world regions and the distributions, so I think we're coming to the end of this, and they say this is now a new wave of big changes. And what they see is that an explosion of quality at a very broad level. And I think that's one of the best things that's happened in international wine, is that there is very, very little bad wine. 99.9% bought and sold of wine bought and sold in this world is absolutely sound. Whether it is inspiring or individual is another question, but certainly the quality has never been better, and that means you need to be very good to stand out. And then it also says that there is an ever greater competition through an ever greater offer. Yeah. And this is something that all of, you might think, how can South Africa break through in the international market? But this is a feeling that pretty much every market has. Say, if you are an Italian producer or a French producer, you have that same thing. How do we stand up to the new world? So this is one of the key points I want to make. This is something of how can we survive in this incredibly competitive market is not something that is true for every single region and every single producer in the world. And this increasing competition is just something that is crazy. And there are new markets still to be discovered, but this is hard because it costs a lot of money to actually acquire new clients in these markets and then to gain a foothold. So you get there, how do you stay there, etc. This is lots of time and money. And then they also see a changed consumer behavior because people drink differently. And this is a great opportunity because new consumers come on board. But amongst these are also youngsters who see wine as a basis for cocktail. Yeah. So that is, it's things are changing, but there are still countries where new middle classes emerge that start drinking wine. And then it also says, painful, of course, for me to read this, it says a new kind of communication and reviewing of wine has occurred. It says the presentation, the language, and the environment have changed immensely. And the importance of specialist media is receding. And the commentators on the wine scene are getting younger and younger. And the entry where people become serious is hello, Johan. So the age where people start switching from cheaper stuff to wine has fallen from 35 to 30. And they say social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok lead to an inflation of loud, shrill, and confused commentary. It becomes harder and harder to build a profile. And the last observation they make is that there is a real polarization between what is perceived as industrial wine and what is perceived as non-interventionist wine. So this is the environment in which everyone operates. And then we come to South Africa. And here, of course, the difficulty is that you have, when I was in South Africa and I experienced load shedding, I know that the South African industry has struggled with profitability, which is really hard. But what is interesting, and anyone who does not know this, there is an immensely insightful source of information, which is just wonderful. These are the global market reports by the company called Siati. They are specialists in bulk wine production, and they have a monthly report, which is so insightful because it just looks ahead and it has a very global view. And they say that this is their latest report, and they say that some distributors are finally nearing the end of the inventories that they built up during the pandemic, and they will soon require fresh volume. And they say, they make the same point, it's incredibly competitive, but they also have a South Africa little chapter. And they say South Africa's 2023 Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay pricing remains stable at potentially the world's most attractive level, certainly for European buyers. The white varietals have been receiving some new international buyer interest in recent weeks, possibly triggered by the short Italian crop and its ramifications across Europe. And so, again, so a global view here, because on the one hand, you have a market that is as competitive and as global as it has never been at any time before in history. And then you have this market that just shifts each year with whatever, and then we have the craziness of the world around us, the conflicts, the shortages. It's just not a nice world we live in at the moment. And so what I wanted to say is many words for this point. South Africa is not alone in trying to get market share, and once it's got it, to actually retain it. But it also has got great advantages compared to other people, especially in pricing, which is sad for you and terrible for the rand, but certainly attractive for the Europeans. I have further data, but I'll stop talking now because I realize I've spoken too long. Sorry.
Well, I just want to ask a follow-up question on that. I mean, your point about there being high quality everywhere, it is tough. I think what puts South Africa on the back foot again is that we don't yet have access to the halo effect. And I give an example. I mean, I could use myself as an example. I love the idea of finding a cheap bottle of Chablis, right? Not because I've drunk the most expensive Chablis that there is out there, but because I am aware of the region as a category at the fine wine level. And I feel that that maybe spreads a lot broader for a lot of the old world. How far away is South Africa from having anything like that? Perhaps, so we go, okay, people recognize Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. Therefore, if I see a cheap Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, I might take a risk on that as a new client. So I want to know, do our white cultivars have any space in that line of thought?
They have absolute space, because I had some fun yesterday looking up the offer. If we look at a nationwide wine specialist that operates across the UK, we have that wine chain called Majestic. They have wine warehouses. The moment you buy 6 bottles or more, you get special pricing. You can walk in there and buy 1 bottle, but then you pay a higher price. The moment you buy 6 bottles at least, you get a substantial discount of, say, £2 or £3 per bottle. And so I looked up, and they have 67. Currently, they have 67 white wines listed from South Africa, and they have 74 New Zealand whites. From Australia, they have 35 white wines. From Chile, 22 white wines. From Germany, they have 13. From Austria, they have 26. From France, they have 309. Okay. And from Italy, they have 78. So you see, South Africa actually isn't doing so badly. And if you look, most of these wines, most of the South African white wines actually are Sauvignon Blancs. And admittedly, they are in that entry-level field, but there also are wines from Iona. They are oak-aged Chenin Blancs. So there is a spread. And that is from a retailer that actually operates across the UK. It's not seen as intimidating. So any person on the street feels they can walk in without being made feel small. And they have a huge offer of South African white wines. And hang on, I also wanted to look at I've also got the full list of the Wine Society, another great distributor who works across the UK and caters very much to Middle England. But I wanted to say more here about when we get to Chenin Blanc. I have more to say about that. But so I think South Africa is already very, very present in this market with entry and medium level. Does it have a halo effect? Certainly not. For me, yes, because I know that because of what I drink, there are some gorgeous Pinot Noirs that I want to get my hands on. There are beautiful Cap Classiques. Am I a drinker of Sauvignon Blanc? Not necessarily, but do I know that there is some gorgeous stuff, like, for instance, Iona's oak-aged Sauvignon Blancs? These things, to me, are up there. Do they have a halo? No.
Or not yet, hopefully, because of people like you doing what you do. Despite the dying prominence of specialist content producers, I think voices like yours are important to talk about South African Sauvignon Blanc, which we are going to come back to. But Johan has joined us, so I wanted to talk more about that, but I think we actually need to bring Johan into the conversation a little earlier, because in today's conversation, there are obviously a whole lot of different angles that we can tackle the topic from, and we've already talked about various lower tier, mid-tier, fine wine. We touched on bulk wine, but I want to bring a statistic to Johan's attention, and he already knows the statistic, but I want to get an insight on it, because I mentioned earlier, the South African national vineyard has been shrinking for a decade. And a lot of people get very concerned about that. We've gone from roughly 100,000 hectares down to below 90,000 hectares in 2022. the number of grape growers in the country has dropped by 25% in the same time. Now, it's actually not immediately clear what that means. Some people feel like it's a tragedy, and some economists think it might be a good thing. So, Johan, can you give us some of your thoughts on not just the statistics, but perhaps the causes behind those statistics? What is making our national vineyard shrink?
Thanks a lot for having me, and sorry for being late. My diary is a mess. Yes, so I think I saw the stat about a year ago, not looking for it particularly, but growing up in the industry, you're always aware of what's going on, but you don't really interpret the numbers. I mean, you can also pair the age of vines to that stat, but I'll touch on it a bit later. So yes, we've shrunk almost by 10% in the last 10 years, decade, as you say. And then we've also kept production slightly stable or even rising. So what that means is it's an increase of tonnage per hectare. There is a couple of other assumptions you can make of quality that might be diminishing as a cause of that. It is an assumption. We know quality and cropping is very closely related, but not always, depending on where you sit, where your production area is. I think what's also important is which regions are suffering the most of this. As we entered the market in '92, the free market, so to speak, we planted a lot of fruit. There was already a big industry in South Africa, but we started planting a lot of fruit, and back then probably not always in the most favorable areas for long-term sustainability. And I think to a large degree, that's what's starting to happen, is the areas that was marginal to begin with is starting to not be profitable. So rather have fruit there, or rather go back to grazing or seasonal grazing. So it means as a direct result that the more marginal regions will be shrinking more, I would say, in the next couple of years. One, because of drought or climate change. Two, because of profitability, because we all know that I think 2 to 3% of the world's wine is sold above, and you can add the stat there, but it's sold above $10 a bottle, so to speak. So it's the competition from around the world has become immense, and to have 1.9% of surface, but 4% of volume also shows you to a large degree of where the market buys. And that's been what South Africa's Achilles heel has been over the past 29 years, is our price access or price point at which we operate. So because we have not been able to effectively move this price point north of $10 a bottle on average, the marginal areas suffers. And even the more irrigated areas like the Breede River Valley and the likes, Robertson, I mean, that's all along the big artery of the Cape Winelands, the Breede River. You still have to do your math. You still have to talk to your local economist or your Vinpro guy and say, listen, peaches or apricots or plums is more profitable in the short run. But if you look at vineyards over the long term, I've just had a meeting early this morning with one of our producers. Vineyards in the long run is much more stable. It's not high, but it's much more stable. So you have a forecastable income as a producer. Yeah, I mean, that's the short and long of it. I think might it shrink a bit more? I think there might be more shrinkage coming. I can't say by how many percent, but what's encouraging to see really in the market is that there is replantings. So coming back to age, I think 48% of our market, of our vineyards are older than 16 years of age. If you go and interpret that stat further, I think a very large portion of that 48% is red wines in general. And before '92, we were predominantly a white growing country, a white growing region, white wine growing region. And even as high as 90% of our wines were white grapes. And now it came down to we were close to 65% at one point in terms of volume, which we put out, which is more towards what the new norm, I think, is for the world. People are swapping now from red to white, and rosé is also in the category of white wine. So I think what we see, or I not think what we see, what we see at Spears is that there's a white is more or less stable, but rosé is increasing and at a cost of red wine production. So let's call it Blanc de Noir for the international audience. For South Africa, we know we can make rosé in a different way. We're allowed to make it in a different way, but so yeah, the decline of tonnages is going to come pretty soon because of the age of the vineyards. So at some point, we're not going to see that constant rise of tonnage, but we're also going to see that drop off because the vines are getting old. Yes, Anne.
Just a question about the stability. Does that apply to table grapes as well as wine grapes? You said wine grapes are a much more stable crop. I mean, grapes are a much more stable crop.
No, I think if you I can hazard a guess, but table grapes will be much more in the commodity market, which means it's more in the fruit market. So it's much more unstable. Grape wine, well, grapes for wine is a lesser sort of traded commodity, so the price is a bit more stable. But I mean, with pressure, stock levels around the world, it becomes an intensely traded commodity, and which puts prices immensely under pressure. One, and two, puts profitability under pressure. I think that's without the grower, you won't have a product. So, but the grower can't survive because of profitability. That's our challenge.
And I'd love to bring you in here. You have some comments on that.
Yes, two comments. Shrinkage is not necessarily a bad thing, because if what dies off was not profitable anyway, then you must ask, is that really a loss? And then, just as I know it's not nice when things come to an end, but you have to ask. I also have to remind you that during COVID, there were winemakers in Alsace who had tanks, tanks on lorries arrive, take all of their wine in order to be distilled for alcoholic hand gel. And then you must think, okay, so you have a classic European region, you work your ass off literally on a steep slope trying to grow something that what they sold was probably not on a steep slope, but you have to ask yourself, okay, is this what I'm growing my grapes for? Just as a kind of comment from the sidelines, okay, is it always such a bad thing if something that wasn't working comes to an end? And this might be part of this change of the market that we see, because there always are losers and there are winners. And the other thing, I thought that, Johan, that point you made about the vine age reminded me of a very key thing that somebody explained to me in Central Otago. Central Otago also came to the fore very, very slowly. People first started planting in the 80s, and then in the early 2000s, by that time, it was, Central Otago Pinot is the next big thing. And people were planting, hell for leather. And then the world financial crisis came into 2008 and put the kibosh on that. And then for a long while, there was nothing. And people thought, oh my God, profitability is shit and blah, blah. But that kibosh and that stop of planting for, say, 7 or 8 or 9 years, when people sort of, when just due to the world financial crisis actually meant that the average age of those new plantings went up, and that came with a very perceptible shift in quality. And that is, so it's terrible when you think, okay, somebody has to give up. And it's really sad, because you plant a vineyard not for, we know it's not an annual crop. And we know that there's some amazing old vines in South Africa. So that is wonderful. It's also an opportunity to go and look at other grape varieties. And I know I just made the point about world markets, and here we have Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. Would I even include Chenin in that? Chenin is a different matter, but there are other grape varieties that might actually be more sustainable, like South Italian varieties, like Portuguese varieties. When I look at Fiano, Greco, Grillo, Vermentino, or Verdelho, sort of truly Mediterranean varieties that are suited to the climate, that might need less irrigation, that might be sustainable in other ways. Is there a ready market for them is the other question, of course, but there always are opportunities when an industry undergoes such a shift.
Just and on that last little list, I noticed you didn't mention Pinot Gris. And there was an interesting little study a while ago done by a South African data company that highlighted Pinot Gris in South Africa as one of the key economic opportunities because it crops well, it's easy to grow, it's not offensive. But you didn't mention that. Was there any reason why you wouldn't include that in the list?
Pinot Grigio, I think I have actually got, this is a quote from Daisy Shepherdson. She is head of the range at Laithwaite's, and she recently said, this was from October 2023, she says, in terms of white wine, and Laithwaite's is another big wine distributor, an online retailer. In terms of white wines, the classics continued to top our bestseller charts. Sauvignon Blanc currently makes up over 30% of our sales, followed by Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio. And yes, Pinot Grigio is a market opportunity, but everybody else thinks exactly the same. And you are just going to go into that same, if you want to move with those very volatile waves of the international bulk market, then Pinot Gris is your answer. Okay. But not, do I think it is, you already have got that with Sauvignon Blanc, so do you need to add another thing to that, or do you need to come from a different direction?
Well, so I want to bring Evan Alexander in here. I mean, there's been a lot of ideas flowing around the issue. And I wanted to get you to talk a little bit about Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, maybe it is our Pinot Gris, in the sense that, I mean, Anne just reminded us we've been living in a very turbulent time. I mean, the last, what they say, something in the last 30 years, we've had 5 once in a lifetime events or whatever, it's like, it's a pretty crazy time to do anything. But amidst all of the craziness and the shrinking vineyards and the global pandemics, and the one winner in South Africa has been Sauvignon Blanc. It's one of our most planted cultivars. It's the only cultivar to meaningfully grow its share of the national vineyard over the last 10 years. It's also the most consumed locally. It's the most exported. So can you give us a little bit of insight into why this cultivar is succeeding? I mean, is the answer sadly just because it's cheap, or do we have something more to offer than that?
Thanks, Jono. Quite a loaded question, considering I'm not a classic Sauvignon Blanc drinker. But I mean, you touched on it there. Should Sauvignon Blanc be our sort of version of Pinot Gris? I would actually argue that that's what we've got Chenin for. Chenin is a delicious, versatile. It grows. It's very resilient to drought. Everything else. You spoke about that halo effect. There's I think we've got. I think it's about 30,000 hectares of Chenin planted in the world, and of that we've got about 17,000. Yet we still don't have that halo effect. People still considering the Loire Valley as the home of Chenin Blanc. I think at most I've probably got about 7,000 or 8,000 hectares. So it really is our variety. To me, that's the one that is affordable wines that we all like to drink on a daily basis. To me, I'm drinking more Chenin than Sauvignon. But you are right, Sauvignon Blanc. I'm wrong in this in saying that I'm not a Sauvignon drinker because everyone else is by the looks of things. It is still our most planted, our most drunk. But interesting enough, I looked at some stats, and it's actually in the domestic market, it's been in decline since 2019. So although plantings are up, it is in decline in South Africa. So you have to ask yourself, why is it in decline? Where's it all going? Potentially some of it's going into white blends, which is probably a conversation we can have after this or in the comment section, because I think that's another whole webinar on delicious white blends. But then you'd have to look at the export markets. And I pulled some stats just on Sauvignon Blanc exports in the last 12 months. We exported as a country 17 million litres of packaged goods, which is about 11% down year on year, and 44 million litres of bulk. unfortunately, which is about 8% down. So although it's down in last year, it's actually far better than the industry average, which is for white wines is sitting at about closer to about 20% down from an export point of view. So we have to ask, where's it all going? It's fantastic that we're exporting Sauvignon Blanc. I think, again, going back to that halo effect, a large portion of this is New Zealand Sauvignon, and you mentioned the amount of New Zealand SKUs in Majestic. I've got no doubt that 60-70% of those are going to be Sauvignon Blanc. New Zealand has really been able to create this beautiful halo effect around New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. It's, I can almost not, when I travel, I can't say the word Sauvignon Blanc without people saying New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which is what, Chablis, Burgundy, Bordeaux, they've managed to do really, really well. And if you look at kind of harvests in New Zealand, they had a really good harvest this year, but they've come off the back of a couple of really tough harvests. So I think bulk exports out of South Africa, there was a portion that went to New Zealand, to bulk up their blends a bit for Marlborough, Sauvignon Blanc, etc. But it's mostly because the demand for fresh New Zealand sort of pyrazine-driven Sauvignon Blanc globally is still really, really high. And when demand is exceeding supply, there's going to be opportunities. That's just kind of normal opportunities. So we've seen a lot of Sauvignon Blanc opportunities come up as a result of that. And when you look at I won't speak a lot about bulk because we don't really trade in the bulk market, but I think bulk is an interesting figure to look at because it kind of guides you on what the industry is doing. And Marlborough at the moment, if you're buying sort of bulk Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in the open traded bulk market, you're looking at about $5 a litre for Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. Our top end stuff from South Africa, and Johan, you can comment on this probably better than I can, but our really good drinking Sauvignon Blanc, stuff that would go into a bottle of Sauvignon that sits at about 120, 130 Rand in South Africa, that's sitting at $1 a litre. Our normal stuff, and Johan, you can talk to this, is sitting at about 50 to 60 cents a litre. So there's a huge demand for it because we're just so affordable. And when you look at markets like the USA, which we export a lot of bulk to, they've got a 25% leeway on blending. So if you want to bottle Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in the USA, you can put 75% Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc at $5 a litre, and you can top that up with 25% of our stuff coming between 50 cents and $1. So it's crazy. So there are great opportunities for it. I think I think from a farming point of view, you guys have covered that nicely and the difficulties in it, but I remember having a conversation with an iconic farmer, Willie Dreyer, in the Swartland a couple of years ago, and he was taking me through his farming model, and he was just shaking his head at the wine industry because he said when he sells his other products, those contracts are negotiated months ahead. They pay him cash up front. They come and collect what he's harvested and take it away. He said, you buggers in the wine industry, you tell me what I must plant. I've got to plant it, and only 4 years later I can finally pick it. Then you tell me I must go and buy a French barrel to put it into for a year or two. Before then you tell me that it's, in order to sell it, I've got to travel around the world and go pound the pavement. Which it made so much sense. When it comes to that, something like Sauvignon Blanc, to me, from a basic economics point of view, you're harvesting this late January, February. It's going through ferment in a stainless steel tank. You're putting into a wonderfully, if you're bottling it nice and fresh in a screw cap, and from a cash flow point of view, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that also potentially from a basic economics and farming point of view is one of the advantages to us producing lots of Sauvignon.
But can I you mentioned a gap there of $4. So what's happening in that gap of $4? Because obviously there are other players. So sure, New Zealand's sitting at $5 bulk per litre, but there's obviously, who are the guys who are pressing us below $1? Because if there wasn't anyone, we'd just sell it $2 or $3. So do you know what I mean?
We're probably pressing ourselves below that dollar. It's the nicety of South Africans that we apologize before asking if we can do business with somebody, where what we've learned about Australians and certainly the Kiwis is that, they lean into those kind of conversations. It's undeniable that, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, you open a bottle of it and, it whips you around the face. The pyrazines are so strong. There's an unbelievable style there that people want and drinkers want to drink. So they can certainly charge a premium. And then I think you've got to look at geography. The size of Marlborough, and you probably know better than me, but I think we could fit it between sort of Dorp Street and Church Street and up. It's tiny. So again, supply and demand, small geographical area, incredible growers. but that's basic economics. In between there, you find, I know Chile have produced quite a bit in exporting there. Chile's exports are down about 20%. They're really struggling. They've just, I read an article a couple of weeks ago when they're ripping up 10,000 hectares of vines in Chile, just, despite the fires and everything else and the difficulty that they've had. There's just, I'm not saying there's no demand for Chilean wine, but global demand for wine is softening.
Yeah. So, but when it comes to pricing, and I know I don't want to spend too long, in fact, I want to move in the opposite direction away from bulk, but last question on that topic. Where would Chilean bulk wine be priced? I assume it's going to be a lot closer to our end of the spectrum.
It probably would be, and I think especially if you start to look at the subsidies and everything else and trade deals that the South American countries have in place, far better than, unfortunately, our government's managed to negotiate for us, and I say that with respect to the Department of Trade and Industry, but they would be closer to our side of it. So probably closer to. I'm speaking actually. I don't know the answer, but it would be $1, $1.20, $2. Somewhere around there. But again, this is, to me, it's just basic supply and demand. We're in a period, and driving through Stellenbosch this morning, those grapes are growing, right? I mean, we've got cellars. If cellars are full, tanks are full, barrels are full, and your vineyard's full of grapes, and you've got to bring that stuff in the next month or so. That is, prisoner's dilemma. You're going to sell it.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Drop the price.
So, if I can just stick with you for a little bit longer, I noted maybe 2 years back was the first time, I think, in South African history where the sale of packaged red wine exceeded the sale of bulk red wine. And I stand under correction. It could have happened before in history, but it seemed to be a momentous shift where the red wine sales in South Africa have somehow managed to build brands strong enough to outdo the appeal of the cheaper, more anonymous bulk sales. What are some of the things that you think they've done right, and how far away are the big South African white wine brands from achieving that same shift in balance?
It's a good question. Having not seen the stat, I'm not entirely sure whether is that because bulk was down and packaged goods was very on the up. But I do believe that as a USP, we can build brands in this country, and I think we build really, really strong brands. And I think what's happened, and Anne mentioned it in the last 10 years, people are becoming aware of South Africa producing really world-class wines and at incredible value. I was in Dubai 2 weeks ago, and at our importers main trade show, and there was 180 producers, all the great producers from around the world. And I was standing next to one of my favorite Australian producers whose wine sold for between $300 and $400 a bottle. On the right was Dow Vineyards, who's just been sold to Treasury for, I think it's almost $1 billion. And we were standing there with our really great South African wines that are selling for about $50 a bottle, And absolutely, we had every single winemaker in the room coming to taste them going, this is ridiculous. You can't make this for $50. The value is unbelievable. So I think we are at risk of, unfortunately, building a reputation that we are too cheap and people don't take us seriously at the top end, but we still just, I think the value for money that you can get from South Africa, and especially branded South Africa, what we need is, we probably do need a yellowtail, we need a Cloudy Bay, to use those two examples. We need, the other regions, you talk about Chablis and things like this, but we need these big drivers to go. I think we're fortunate to be involved in Chocolate Block, which I'd say is probably the most renowned South African brand at a premium level around the world. And we need one or two more of those to really start to get the momentum. But red blends, Syrah, it's when I travel to France, I tend not to take Chardonnay because I think the great examples of Burgundy are some of the greatest wines in the world. But I'd absolutely take some of our Syrahs and our Syrah-based blends that can go toe-to-toe with most top-end producers in the Rhone. And I think this is a good example of it.
Yeah. Well, come on then. Let's see Vinimark bring out a vanilla block or something. I mean,
temptation is not there yet.
we can work on the brand name at another time. So, Collier, I wanted to bring you into the discussion because I think as cellar master of Bosman Family Wines, I mean, you all the time are having to make decisions on where to push the business, and you and I have chatted a little bit about some of the more recent properties and how you're going to plant them, and you manage a really complex portfolio of wines, packaged wines, not to mention, I imagine, all the other contracts that you have with unpackaged wines. So I just want to know, how do you decide what cultivars you want to put. What is your data telling you? Are you leaning into Sauvignon in Wellington, or do you think that Bosman is better suited to something like Chenin Blanc, or are you hedging your bets?
So the key thing that you said was complex. So in planting vineyards, the big thing for me is that in the wonderful beverage that we work with, it's all about provenance. So yes, you might want to have this broad basket of things, but in the end you are, and I don't want to say limited, to where you are based, but it does give you a very specific framework. Luckily, I think a long time ago, Bosman has decided that we'd rather focus on the reasons why people would come to us. And usually those reasons are either looking for wines with ethical and or environmental credentials, and that's the core. When they come with their shopping lists, there will always be a Sauvignon Blanc on that list. There will always be a Chardonnay. We will always propose Chenin first, but we've also learned that it is about supply and demand. There will be a demand for Sauvignon Blanc, so yes, we do have that in our portfolio. That being said, with Sauvignon Blanc, for instance, I will have core plantings so that when we're talking about wines in winemaking and in the regime that we're following, that there is, a sense of place and a sense of us in that wine. But I'm very happy to also source grapes from the guys who are planted in the right places for that. And then at the high end for us, we have the Upper Hemel and Arde, which gives us the opportunity to have cool climate and to plant the things that do well there. So, that's the backdrop. I think as a country, we are so diverse, linking it to who you are and what your strengths are, and then looking at that basket is important. I think for us, for the future, we were talking, Anne, you spoke about, planting. Well, I think what you alluded to is planting for the future. So at Bosman, obviously, our parent company is also a vine nursery. We've 1 out of 4 vines planted in South Africa is from this nursery specifically. So obviously what I'm giving you is just a snapshot from a proportion of our industry. But for the 2024 grafting season, for instance, of the wine grape portfolio, 65% was white, 35% was red. And of that white contingency, very close, but leaded by Sauvignon Blanc, followed by, can't believe I said that. Leaded by Chenin. Last year it was Sauvignon Blanc, now led by Chenin, Sauvignon Blanc, then Colombar, which I think, Evan, is a very different discussion in terms of maybe local consumption and and again, profitability, and then Chardonnay. So that's that perspective. Really happy that people are planting Chenin. And maybe the other thing is that as a company also looking towards disease resistant and also drought tolerant cultivars. So on the white side, Viura, Vermentino, Grenache Blanc, obviously. And then if you think about disease resistant, Solera, Fleurtaille, Sauvignon Gris. So these are grapes which we can really start planting quite quickly. I obviously foresee that in our industry, it might be like 15%. People might, try them, and this would be something that you would be able to blend into your, the strong contenders. But I think it's important that we start thinking about those plantings and how they can also impact the future of planting in South Africa.
So a little question you mentioned about being willing to buy grapes from other regions where they thrive, where certain cultivars thrive. Historically, the price of grapes in South Africa has been horrendously low. Are you beginning to see that if you want to hunt a particular cult, say you want Chardonnay from Walker Bay, which I know you've got properties there in Hemel and Arde, but if you're hunting that, are you expected to pay significantly more? Is the market beginning to reflect better prices for regions suited to cultivars? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does. But when this doesn't happen a lot, when I do source grapes, it will usually be grapes with these added credentials, either being fair trade, either being organic, and that obviously comes at a premium. So, but it also comes at a real cost for the producer itself as well. So one understands that. I think, again, it's all about playing to our strengths. We are a diverse producing country. And the more we can carve into what those niches are in those specific places, this halo effect will follow. So I'm hoping, and I think maybe that's why we're also seeing people planting Chenin. Chenin is that one grape which shows the winemaker's hand, but also shows exactly where it's planted in such a beautiful way. Obviously, alluding to Evan's note about profitability, it's also one of those grapes which, in terms of cash flow, also helps its producer and the winery where it is at. And maybe that's why we all love it so much too. But yes, I haven't answered your question. If there are those credentials, yes, we'll be willing to pay for them. And, people carving their reputations in terms of that sense of place and the grape itself, that is definitely on track. We're seeing that.
Yeah, I suppose, I've done a little bit of looking into the price of Syrah grapes from various regions. And I noticed that the price of a Gullis Syrah, for example, is skyrocketing, whereas it's not from Stellenbosch. And I wondered if you were experiencing that. In my mind, that would be a sign that the market is at least responding positively and starting to reward farmers better for planting wisely.
Yes, but let's be honest, in Wellington, if you're farming, it might cost you 50,000 rands a hectare, whereas if you're doing that, let's say in the Upper Yamana, it might be 90,000. So the real cost of producing grapes in those places are real. Then again, I always say these places, high risk, high reward. I mean, what a wonderful thing to see those Syrahs from that specific place, the attention, the amount of extract, just the color, all of those things. I think people acknowledge the input and they also acknowledge what is possible from those grapes. And yes, willing buyer, willing seller, we're seeing that.
Yes. I was going to come back to it later, but it feels like a logical follow-on to ask you about the certifications that you deal in. I mean, obviously, Horstman have set a stellar example on the international stage. I mean, you guys are a bigger producer who's showing that these certifications can be achieved and you can operate with that ethos at scale. So I just wanted to get your insight into, is this a long game? When you're considering white wine portfolio specifically, are the costs of these certifications paying for themselves now, or are you hoping that they will pay for themselves down the line? What is the market demanding internationally?
Well, there it absolutely has everything to do with the gatekeepers. If you could imagine an entity like the Co-op in the UK, where they absolutely are champions of fair trade wines, and that is what they're selling, that makes a huge impact. On the other hand, Sainsbury's, for instance, they taste the difference, their own brand label in their shop. If it's from South Africa, it needs to be fair trade. So that's taking, a stance in terms of wanting wines from South Africa to be ethically traded. So it's through that kind of support that it's obviously possible. But Anne spoke about how the end customer, the people who we're making all of these wines for, how they're changing. And I think a big thing, which is really important, is that people are, wanting to buy change and wanting to buy, or feel that what they're buying can be, have an effect. So, and we see that more and more, people thinking about organics, thinking about low impact, and thinking about the personal, the effect that wine has on people's lives, will become more important. So for us, it's definitely, it's linked to, a family or families philosophy, but I can only speak for ourselves. It's definitely changed our business for the good.
Good to hear.
And
So
we have to add to this that these certifications that are required by the big distributors, not just in the UK, but absolutely the Scandinavian monopolies, who absolutely also have ever greater demand on sustainability. And now you come into shipping wine worldwide and the carbon footprint of packaging, and then bulk gets yet another spin. And the question is what is moved in bulk really always low quality, or is there a much greater opportunity with the explosion we have seen of wine in cans and of wine in different kinds of packaging, in pouches, in PET bottles? Yes, they are not the fine wine that you buy and to lay in your cellar. But this is changing too. And there is an opportunity, and it's driven very much by requirements, also of, sorry, got a frog in my throat, of the not just sustainability and organic certifications, but also ISO certifications of efficiency of a company, and these very onerous things that are difficult to achieve, but they become ever more important. And
Yes.
I think it's, we're speaking about buying Chablis, and Evan was talking about, using names like Burgundy. And now just think, I know South African wine has been made since the 17th century, but think of the reputational head start these people have had. Think of that. And then think of others, like, for instance, I'm German, and look at the reputational deficit. This is a weird thing, and it's actually not linked to quality, because those of us who can taste a wine, and we can say this is up here. And what Corlia said about Chenin, you can taste the place. I think you can taste the place with Sauvignon Blanc as well, beautifully so. Beautifully so. It's just that people don't see it as the variety that transports a place. But boy, does it transport a place. And especially so, I've tasted coastal Sauvignon Blanc that was so saline, so fresh. You felt you were you smelled the Atlantic. And then you have inland Sauvignon Blanc, say from Johann Reinecke, with a bit of oak, and then you have those warmer flavors. So I think that is true for Sauvignon Blanc as well. And there might be opportunities in doing something that is perhaps not in a bottle, and which is only filled in the destination country, but then absolutely scores in terms of sustainability, because it's filled in a pouch with a beautiful packaging, and not at the bottom end of the market, because this is what is changing very much. And we're only at the beginning of it. But for instance, the Wine Society in the UK has said we want to be the most sustainable wine supplier. And that might mean, well, not might, but that does mean also very different packaging. And I think there are opportunities there where you can score, where somebody bound by a appellation law, say in Europe, and is forced to bottle at the estate in order to put a certain appellation on, etc., and it's going to take them bloody years to change their law, or so I think there are opportunities there that are not just at the bottom of the market, but in that mid-segment, helped along by the requirement to comply with certain regulations.
Well, that's good to hear. Ev, I think you wanted to add to that point.
Very, very briefly, because I think you covered that really well, Anne, but it's just, I've seen it's been an interesting shift in the last year or two when it comes to what you were saying, when it comes to bulk. We're seeing now, traditionally speaking, bulk would be commodity traded in there and everyone doing it because price was the major driver. It's cheaper to bottle in Europe. What we're seeing now is that it's, and we use the expression ticking the box, but I'm probably being a little bit harsh to it, but it's a vital KPI for a lot of these big retailers. They've all made climate commitments. They need to source ethically. Their climate commitments by 2030 need to be helped by bottling this. They don't mind paying a premium for the bulk, because it's actually what you're achieving by bottling in the UK, for instance, is really helping them achieve their climate commitment and lowering their carbon footprint. So I don't think we mustn't be too scared of these bulk opportunities and thinking that, it's just generic South African bulk going into a Shaka Zulu label. What you said, Anne, is completely correct. And we must realize that the motivation is different, but they must also realize in these big opportunities that they're going to have to pay a premium, because when it comes to our sustainability, the environment is high, but in South Africa, it's not as high as jobs and employment. So we've got to keep jobs in the wine industry. We can't, and by keeping jobs, primary production has to happen here. So I think all these big retailers and big distributors have to be paying a premium for our bulk, so that we can absolutely channel that extra premium back into our communities.
Well, as Johan said earlier, if you don't have the producers, you don't have a product. And so, Johan, just coming back to you, I mean, we've talked a lot about Sauvignon, but both Corlia and Evan, gave a huge vote of confidence towards Chenin Blanc. Now, Spear has long, had a long line of accolades for their top end Chenin Blanc. at least in South African competitions, and I know there've been a couple of international as well, but what is your take when you're traveling abroad on how South African Chenin Blanc is perceived? And I know there's not one answer, but would you say it reaches into the fine wine category on occasions, or is it only cheap and cheerful?
I think, you can't have a conversation of Chenin Blanc without having Sauvignon Blanc on the table, because that is the flavor of the world. And the other non-pyrazine varietal is obviously Chardonnay, which has a higher premium, both in Europe. If we're just talking about the Western Hemisphere, both in Europe and in the US. I think there's generally a shift. Let's start on the cheap and cheerful side. I'll get to the more premium wines in a moment. There's definitely a shift, I think, away, and maybe you have some stats on this, but away from Pinot Grigio and something more towards a Chenin Blanc, which to Evan's point also of earlier is much more, as being such a versatile varietal can make you a neutralisk wine as Pinot Grigio is, with some low peach notes, maybe some melon notes. And that sits at, in the UK market, sits at £7 a bottle, which might even be lower than a Pinot Grigio that's of quite average quality from Italy. So being a nondescript sort of wine at £7 a bottle, made from Chenin Blanc, I don't think it's doing us any favors. We are certainly moving volume, not Spear, but in general, the country is moving volume in that price point. And to a large degree, it's sustainable on farm level, but the gist of it is that it shouldn't be at that price point. We can make wines at £10 a bottle, as an example of Chenin Blanc, that no one in the world can make. The Loire cannot make wine for £10 a bottle on the shelf that's of the quality that we can put out there. And I think that's a little bit the message that I want to get across, because I see the people in the audience. You must be very careful of not now just going and sowing Chenin Blanc wherever it's not supposed to grow, one. And two, going back to a point where we had 50% of all our plantings just being Chenin Blanc. Because then we have to restart a brandy industry, we have to restart a sherry type of wine industry, because the people were planted in the wrong places. And we have to be cognitive of the fact that today, when you replant or plant a block of vineyard, it must at least have a more or less an address. You want to know for what you're going to produce for. If you're going to produce for a wine at £7 a bottle today, in the negative inflationary environment that Europe used to be, you're going to slowly farm yourself to death if you do that, because you can't put up the price in that market. So I think we need to be really honest with ourselves and decide where do we want to play. We want to play in a £10 market for entry-level Chenin Blanc without credentials of fair trade and organic and the likes. It's a steep incline, but I think, in my view, this is definitely something where I, as a person, would like to see us, but also where Spear would like to be positioned in a premiumization sort of curvature, maybe making less, but making more profitable wine that is not, as a lot of people will talk about Chenin Blanc being a bread and butter varietal. I personally despise that, the way that people describe something. Chenin Blanc is a great variety that is super versatile, that you can make great wine from at a really good price as well. And here I'm not talking £7, I'm talking £10. So our whole mind needs to shift in that way. And this is, to a large degree, what Spear is doing. We are putting we have been putting a lot of emphasis on Chenin Blanc, I think since 2010. And we have good results because of focus. We have all the varietals, as all of you know. So Sauvignon Blanc has got a very high base, of which we still grow off. Chenin Blanc has got a slightly lower base, but it's growing the fastest. Chardonnay, even a slightly lower base than Chenin Blanc, but Chenin and Chardonnay is growing at the same rate for us. And then if I move to the fine wine segment, I mean, there's guys like Chris Allight, they're doing a sterling job with Chenin Blanc. He makes the wine, it's sold out in the day that he releases it, which I think is a great story for the varietal. There's the oaks from the Swartland, there's Adi, there's Eben that does, and the Sadi family, David and Aria, who's doing an immense job with Chenin Blanc. And coming back to sense of place, those wines scream sense of place, or where they grow. It's old vines. I can almost safely say that some of the varietals that makes the best wine from old vines is Chenin Blanc. Not all varietals can make wine from old vines. Sauvignon Blanc will have a tough time because of the disease-stricken element of the grapevine, being trunk disease. But Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, you don't always find a lot of old vine Chardonnays either, because they need a lot of encouragement to be bud at, evenly. So it's not such a natural process. But Chenin Blanc, definitely, it's a great variety on the premium end that I think it can fly a flag. So if you talk about Burgundy and Chardonnay, if you talk about New Zealand and Sauvignon Blanc, talk about, for the moment, California and Chardonnay, talk about Spain and Portugal with Albarino. It's the whole world is pushing us towards a flagship type of varietal, and the world has been doing it for a while to us with Chenin Blanc. We just need to really take on the opportunity, and as Evan said a bit earlier, not shy away from the conversation of price, but actually to engage into it. But we have to do it as a collective, because any supermarket buyer will come to South Africa with a blank checkbook, but it's got a cap. So if he says he's coming here to buy Chenin Blanc for 35 to 40 p's a liter, he will get it, and they shouldn't get it. That's what we must be very careful of. There's always someone that's more eager to trade at different levels. I think we have to, as an industry, be very cognitive of that. And when we put our weight behind a grape like Chenin Blanc, we have to police that without being policed. But we have to be very careful on what we sell and what we classify as Chenin Blanc. I mean, we've got, I think, arguably one of the best systems in the world for traceability of grapes and vines, and with the Sava system in your wineries, it's easy to see what's going on. I don't think all the regions around the world can hang their cap on that. So therefore, if we see the wine is not in that quality level, if let's say we start a thing like that, wine cannot be labeled as Chenin Blanc because it doesn't agree to what we think it should, then it becomes declassified as a dry white or whatever. We've tried it multiple times in the industry, and I mean, that's also why the body is there, the Savas Wine and Spirit Board. So if you export wine with a name on it, Chenin Blanc, it must at least taste like a Chenin Blanc. But the world has become too used to what Chenin Blanc is tasting like at that price point, and we need to change that. We need to up the game. So if you sell a bottle of wine for 70 pounds in a restaurant of Chenin Blanc, that's a good price, I think, for a bottle of Chenin Blanc from South Africa in a restaurant. But if you order the next bottle, and you order an entry-level Gruner Veltliner from Austria, it's 90 pounds a bottle. Sure. And the challenge is that 70-pound Chenin Blanc bottle, which is coincidentally from us, and this is first-hand experience, knocks the socks 50 times over off from that Gruner Veltliner. And if you drink through the course of your evening, if you drink different wines, everyone wants to come back to that Chenin Blanc because it drinks so nicely. I don't want to use the term value for money, but that's a term that will pop up. Yeah. Compared, if it's 70 pounds for that Chenin and 90 pounds for a Gruner Veltliner from Austria, with no disrespect, the Chenin, even at 90 pounds, will be a great wine. Even at 110 pounds will be a great wine. But somehow we don't back ourselves for that. So that's what we need to fix.
I think there's a great opportunity there, because I've compared this. I've looked at Majestic lists 8 South African Chenins and 8 French Chenins. 2 of the French are actually sparkling wines made from Chenin. Now, I can tell you also that we were using that term halo. I can tell you that nobody here is clamoring, here or in the States or in Scandinavia, is clamoring for Vouvray or Montlouis, which are the classic appellations for Chenin. I think they have very, very similar thoughts. It's just that their industry is far more fragmented, is helped along by EU funding for farming, etc., etc. So the market is skewed anyway. But I can tell you, this is an opportunity because, Johan, you said it. This is a USP, and so now we're blending. We're talking about marketing now rather than varieties. But New Zealand has managed to establish Marlborough Sauvignon as a brand, yeah, and then there is Austria and Grüner Veltliner as a USP. And this is an opportunity for Chenin. And I can tell you that in the Wine Society catalogue, the French Chenin doesn't have its own category. It's thrown in under Chenin Blanc, Romorantin, Fier Gris, and Chardonnay. And there are exactly 4 Chenins here, from entry level to the most expensive, is from a star winemaker called François Chiden in Montlouis-sur-Loire. Might mean something to you. That's £26. And then we have, of course, entry-level Chenin from the Swartland, but the most expensive South African at the Wine Society is Van Lokkerenberg, Trust Your Gut, and that's £27. And that is, they make a point that these are old vines and that it's oak aged. And then at Majestic here, we have the most expensive bottle of Chenin is from De Morganson at £22.50. And it comes with a big stamp saying 100% of consumers would buy this again. So you have already a kind of a premium segment there. And I don't think, unless you're François Chiden, you will find it easy to sell your Chenin in Europe. And you have the advantage of having varietal labeling and not confusing Montlouis or Vouvray or whatever. And I know there are huge challenges in your industry, but the challenge of those French regions is that they're incredibly fragmented. It's so much harder for them by a committee and another committee and another committee to even approve a marketing campaign that isn't. It just comes from a very different place, and I see a much bigger opportunity here. And I can only agree with Johan. It is a great variety, and coming from South Africa, it can have that. It's because it makes everything from light, high volume wines to super sweet, nobly rotten wines. Okay, so where do you place it? But you have a point by saying we should come up with a flavor profile. And that flavor profile has got tropical fruit, has got pineapple, as you said, melon. There are things that people will like and like to drink. And I can also say there is a lot of room between selling a wine for £25 and selling one for £7. There is 10, 11, 12, £13. And these are interesting places to be at that are profitable, but not intimidating.
So we're going to have to try and wrap, and we've gone a little bit over time, but I'm going to ask people at home who are watching this to give us 7 more minutes, maybe. I'm going to have one more question for Anne, and then I want to see if the panel had any questions for each other, and then we'll be done. So hopefully, I know if you've got aircon, then the encouragement is to stay inside for a bit longer. That's great. So, Anne, forget branding, forget market forces, forget all of that stuff. As someone who has spent a little bit of time, especially in the last year, being exposed to South African white wines, if you were recommending people to, or collectors, Europe-based collectors, to fill their cellars with South African white wines, what would be your go-to South African cultivar from a quality perspective purely? Forget price, forget brand. What are the wines that you thought score the highest of our white wines?
Well, my gut feeling is that I would go to fine oak-aged Sauvignon Blanc for still wine, but that is just a very personal thing. I just think that if I ever spent money, should I ever spend money on Bordeaux, which I haven't done, I would spend it on white Bordeaux because I love oaked Sauvignon Blanc. I think it's so beautiful. So I was at Investec. I didn't taste the Chardonnay. I was not on the Chardonnay panel, but I tasted the Sauvignon Blancs and I loved that kind of span that you have. The Chenions, there were fewer Chenions and there were blends, and I think they are beautiful. Blends are wonderful. But what I then spent my time on doing and traveling for is because I was writing about Cap Classique. And of course, most of that is white too. And I am supremely excited about that. And it's generally about sparkling Chardonnay, which I just think what an explosion in quality and what strapping, beautiful, vibrant wines they are. So this is my very, very personal take, because what we drink here most is fizz, and we love that. But what I've tasted of the still whites, where I really think, okay, this is up there. And this is just down to the fact that I've tasted far more Sauvignon than I've tasted Chenin. But I can tell you, beautiful oak-aged, sort of marginal climate, coastal Sauvignon Blanc aged in oak I think, is just so beautiful.
Quite encouraging. Okay, so I mean, I've got loads more questions that I haven't got to ask, but that's fine. I'll get you all back next year, do it again. But I mean, what's lovely about this panel is that we've got exporters, we've got producers, we've got journalists. Are there any questions you guys have for each other that could perhaps enrich the experience and knowledge of the people at home? You've got 30 seconds to decide whether you want to ask anything. And if not, that's also fine.
Well, Johan, your idea of coming up with a profile for Chenin is actually a fabulous idea, and also coming up with with something saying, okay, it shouldn't be labeled as Chenin if it doesn't meet these standards. There is an opportunity in that.
Well, and
the collaborative
Chenin Blanc Association has come up with an amazing flavor wheel. So, Anne, if you haven't encountered that, I'm going to make sure that you get sent a copy of that flavor wheel, because the Chenin Blanc Association is doing amazing work there, and you might be quite pleased to see the progress that they're making. Sorry, Johan, did I cut you off?
I was going to say that. I mean, it sounds like it's my idea, but it's not. It's an industry idea that has been coming for quite some time. And that flavor wheel is there. There's a push for, I think, from the Scandinavian supermarkets, but they've the Scandinavian markets, but also from the UK supermarkets, to have a sweetness indicator on the back of the label, commercial wines. And if I touch on that really quick, I know it's not your question, Anne, but I've answered your question, but it's the sweetness level of wines and the sweetness perception of wines is very much what dictates if a person in general likes a wine or not. So you're a mineral oaky Sauvignon Blanc drinker, as an example, but the general populace around the world drinks vast quantities of Pinot Grigio, which is often nondescript. The point I'm trying to get to is that Chenin Blanc has got this inherent fruit sweetness. I always call it sunshine in a glass. You can taste South Africa in a glass if it's Chenin Blanc in that glass. And the whole world is moving towards higher residual sugars because they've got too much acidity, or they got too much tannin because they got dryland vineyards, or whatever the case may be. But South Africa offers that fruit sweetness without sugar. And the generation that we are also very concerned of, it doesn't drink wine just yet. I think Chenin Blanc, much like I think like Italian Pinot Grigio was 30 years ago, Chenin Blanc is that wine, I think, for the young crowd that's moving through RTDs, as we all did, into wine. It's super smooth, it's sweet without having sugar, it's fresh, it's vibrant, not overly acidic. Yeah, I think Chenin is such an interesting varietal for different people.
Thank you, Johan. Okay, I am going to wrap up. I think we've done okay. I've got 5 points that I think can sum up. I mean, there's so many ideas that have been swirling around, but I've loved this conversation. I really do. I wasn't joking about dragging you all back next year, but one of the early points we made was that the shrinking of vineyards, it's a cycle of life. Some of the areas that perhaps shouldn't have been planted were planted. The fact that they are disappearing might be just because they were unprofitable. As Anne asked, is that really a loss? The other thing that Johan brought up is that the vine ages are slowly getting older, and that's actually something exciting and worth looking forward to. And that as our yields begin to drop a little bit as well, that can be linked to higher quality. Then, Johan, you also said, with growth, let's be cautious. You talked about, look, if you're going to go and plant stuff, make sure that that fruit has an address. And I think that's a hugely important point. And Cordelia, you also talked about it. There is a seemingly slightly more discerning, even if it's at the bulk level, they still want a little more, they want more boxes ticked, really, when they are ordering those grapes. Then thirdly, almost everyone agrees that Chenin Blanc is looking super strong. Eve, you mentioned that actually Sauvignon consumption is slightly down over the last few years. Demand for Chenin from a grafting perspective is up. And Johan, your point, I mean, about just the sheer quality of Chenin is really, really exciting. But as Evan pointed out again, demand is softening. So let's be aware, let's grow with caution. And I think one of the points that made at the end, and you made a great point about being a little more creative with our approach to sustainability in the sense that certain bulk wine may not actually be low quality. There are opportunities for bulk shipping of very good quality wine that can then end up in really creative, more sustainable packaging that will attract a premium. And I think this is maybe a category that we haven't thought about too much. The conversation has been binary, packaged goods or cheap bulk. But what about sustainable, intelligent, creative bulk that is bottled on location? So I think that is enough food for thought for the day. Thank you so much to the team, Johan, Anne, Cordelia, Evan. You guys have been great. Thank you so much. And to the guys at home, thanks for being patient and allowing us to go a little bit over time. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us, Jono.
Cheers.